other states and other parts of the world. And in order to enhance and make those industries better, we need to have governmental policies that recognize that. And that's one reason I've been trying to get the R&D tax credit expansion through. And I keep fighting with some of my more liberal Democratic colleagues who view it as corporate welfare, right? And so it's important to have AeA up there, and they can explain that, well, this R&D tax credit works differently than other tax credits, because a company only gets it if they actually put more money into R&D than the previous year. And the unique nature of R&D, most of that money is people. And so essentially, when a company took this credit, they almost certainly just created more jobs. So essentially it's a jobs credit. And certainly I can go around trying to educate 120 members, but it's much better, much easier if AeA can say, we're the leaders of technology, this is how this credit works. And it's things like that that are so important, because every 2-year cycle, as Roxanne mentioned, there's so many bills. I vote about 5,000 times. I hit that red or green button about 5,000 times. About 5,000 bills go through. 80% of it, I don't get a single phone call, a single letter, a single visit from anyone. And so when someone visits or calls and says, hey, there's this bill and there are these issues, it makes my staff and I look at that bill much more closely. So it's very important, again, to have folks in Sacramento that can do that. Didn't want to actually introduce my staff member, Candace Ellen, who is here, so I want to recognize her. And so in terms of the budget, and let me sort of explain to you why we have this huge $42 billion problem. And it's not that we spent $40 billion all of a sudden based on our budget from last year. Essentially what happened is we lost a huge amount of revenue. And it's the same thing that happened to 49 other states, the same thing that's happened to the whole nation and actually the world. And so we're trying to now recover and to close that gap. And it's very hard, unbelievably hard to do that as a state. And there was this very interesting article in the New York Times a few weeks ago called 50 Herbert Hoovers. And essentially what the point of the article was, you've got, well, so Herbert Hoover, right, was blamed by a lot of historians for trying to balance the budget in a recession, thereby essentially causing the Depression. And so if you look at what the federal government is doing, they're doing exactly the opposite. They are spending like crazy, and they're not raising taxes. You have 50 states doing exactly the opposite. We're going to be raising taxes and cutting spending, both of which are bad in a recession. But the 50 states have to balance their budgets because we can't print our own money. So you have this strange reaction from the states are countering exactly what the federal government is doing. And that's why we keep asking the Obama administration for economic stimulus, the House of Representatives. They actually just put a bill out today that's going to give California, I think, about $4.5 billion in terms of transportation projects and so on. So you have this sort of dynamic going on where you have the states that have to balance their budgets, and there is no good solution to this budget in California. It's either going to be massive cuts or massive taxes or half massive amounts of both. At the 50,000 level, that's the only thing you can have in order to balance the budget. So we're trying to protect what we can. And at some level, it doesn't matter if you lay off a private sector person or if you lay off a teacher. You're reducing spending, you're reducing economic activity. So it's very important that we get some federal help. That's one reason a bunch of us went back, not only to see Obama inaugurated, but also lobby federal officials to see if they can get more funds in California. And we are a donor state, which means for every dollar we send to DC, we get about 79 cents back. Other states like South Dakota, for every dollar they send, they get $1.25 back. And it's a $50 billion problem. So if we could even fix that, we'd have no budget deficit. In fact, if we got $1 back for every dollar we sent, we could be giving tax refunds. That's a scale of the problem. Hopefully with the new administration, we can fix that. Now in terms of structurally why we enter into these budget deficits every few years, we have an extremely volatile revenue system. Because of what Prop 13 did, essentially property taxes no longer became a very large part of the state's budget. So we had to rely on income taxes, on businesses and on individuals. Which is why I like to tell some of my colleagues, look, the way we actually get money to spend is when businesses do well. And when they don't do well, we get into these budget deficits. So, because it's so volatile, when things are good, we get a huge amount of surplus money. When things are bad, we get accelerated deficits. Which is why I voted for the rainy day fund. I think we need to have one. And if we had one during the Great Davis years, we actually could have stored away some of that excess money so that we could have weathered this a little better. But because it's so volatile, every time the economy dips a little bit, we get a massive sort of accelerated reaction. And just to give you an example, last year, no, I'm sorry, it was 2 years ago, we had, I think, about a $4 or $5 billion budget deficit. We were able to close that partly because we got $500 million in revenue from people who sold Google stock. That was about 10% of our budget deficit. I mean, one company stock, right? So, because it's so volatile, it makes it really hard to deal with. That's why we created a tax commission to look at it and see if we can stabilize our revenue sources. Not necessarily increase taxes in general, but to maybe increase some, decrease others, so that over the long term we get a more steady stream of income. The other reason we get in these budget crises is because we have a 2/3 requirement for a budget bill. So only 2 other states have that in the nation, and those 2 other states have 2/3 of the legislature of the same party. So we're the only state in the union where the majority party can't pass a budget, which is why it's chronically delayed. And it's extremely difficult to deal with a 2/3 vote. Just politically speaking, 2/3 is one of the highest thresholds you're ever going to hit, right? In Congress, 2/3 overrides a presidential veto. And just imagine the U.S. Senate had to get a 2/3 vote every time they had to pass a budget. And the U.S. House had to get a 2/3 vote. And the president had to agree. You would almost never get a budget done in D.C. But that's the way we have it in California. So we're trying to figure out a way out to deal with that sort of structural problems. So those are sort of the issues on the budget. I wish I had good news. I don't. I mean, it's just going to be bad.
Do you think it's going to be passed soon, or what kind of timing do you expect?
So we run out of cash in probably 2 weeks, which means issuing IOUs. So hopefully we will get some sort of budget before then. Now the Democrats actually sent an $18 billion budget solution to the governor 3 weeks ago. He vetoed it. We might just send that over again and say, look, we need to at least stop the bleeding for now.
Take a closer look.
Take a closer look at it. So some of the issues we're going through, one is the mortgage and foreclosure crisis. That's something I've worked on for quite a while. And if you sort of think about it, that's sort of what caused the economic downturn, was the massive continuing wave of home foreclosures because of these lending practices that just went out of control, and there was very little government oversight, very little regulation. I think August of this year, August of last year, we had 101,000 foreclosure filings in California alone. That's about 1 every 30 seconds. So until we mitigate that, I don't think our economic recovery is going to begin. And California accounts for about 1/3 of the nation's foreclosures, so we're especially hard hit. And that's one of the bills I'm carrying is it's going to establish a 90-day moratorium on home foreclosures and allow the banks to avoid that if they have a loan modification program to help distressed homeowners stay in their homes, the same way the FDIC ran a program with any bank. So that's the concept of it, and hopefully we'll get some federal TARP money that can fund that. And so that's sort of some issues we're working on, because if you can slow down foreclosures, then you can stabilize home prices, and then I think the economy will start doing a little better. So that's some of the things that are going on in Sacramento. And again, what AeA does for you, it is very important, because they monitor, right, the bills, they lobby on bills, and sometimes there are bills that may have something slipped in that may just drastically affect an industry. People don't know it unless you have experts that can do these sort of analysis. So happy to answer any questions you may have, and thanks again for giving me that.
I guess back on the budget again, it's just, is it true? I was hearing the other day that one of the reasons it hasn't passed is because everybody's expecting, after Obama got in, that he would give California a bunch of money. So they were waiting for that to occur because they figured they didn't have to pass a tough budget.
No,